Originally devised as a spiritual successor to Capcom's horror-themed mansion exploration game Sweet Home, and eventually released as a shameless clone of Alone in the Dark, the original Resident Evil began a series that includes some of the greatest and most embarrassingly bad horror games of all time. In the first part of this retrospective series, we will skip the countless side games, remakes, and god-awful live-action films in order to review the first 6 numbered Resident Evil games. Part 1, Resident Evil 1, released in 1996. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be the last normal person in a world full of retarded people? Aside from moving to Canada, playing Resident Evil 1 for the PlayStation 1 is probably your best bet for capturing that feel. Resident Evil has a true B-movie aesthetic, though in this case, the B stands for buttocks. At times, Resident Evil feels like a polygonal Tommy Wiseau film due to the English script being written by people who had zero understanding of the English language.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
As opposed to what, Barry? Bookmarks and hubcaps? Barry should have just said that the rounds would be more effective against live enemies like hunters and spiders than against reanimated abominations like zombie dogs and Hillary Clinton. Unfortunately, every character in this game talks like a knockoff Christopher Walken due to the voice actors Capcom scrounged up from the set of a softcore porn shoot, neglecting to inform Capcom just how jilted and poorly written their lines were. That isn't to say Resident Evil is a failure. Everyone who's played it will recall the "oh shit" moments that occurred the first time they encountered a shambling corpse, undead Rottweiler, or weaponized Pepe the Frog. And while you push in more musty boxes than an elderly butch lesbian while playing Resident Evil, the non-box based puzzles were memorable and followed a certain logic. For example, when you reach the dead end caused by this flooded path, you'll get a close-up of Jill's ass. Logically speaking, the most sensible move at that point is to crank one out in order to release the fluid. Speaking of Jill, this genuine Frankenstein Valentine props up more pricks than porcupines and is the video game embodiment of female privilege. And I'm not just saying that because I want to come in a sock and slap her with it. Selecting Jill is the equivalent of playing on easy. Due to being a woman, Jill has extra spaces to store any items that she doesn't mind causing to smell like fish. Despite resembling a homeless Steven Seagal impersonator who just ate an entire fried chicken with his bare hands, Jill support character Barry is reliable and constantly bails Jill out of trouble. And like that one uncle you haven't heard of since he gave you a sip of Jesus juice and you had to sleep on your stomach for a month, he always has something special for you to fish out of his front pants pocket. Jill also constantly trips over gigantic piles of ammo. This is especially noticeable since ammo is so scarce for Chris that you'll wind up counting bullets like a Jewish hitman as a result. It also doesn't help that Chris's support character is a 15-year-old girl who wears her Wonder Bra on the outside. Rebecca is the sole survivor of Bravo Team, otherwise known as the Tard Squad. This birth defect brigade included such monumental fuck-ups as Forrest, who was pecked to death by a 1-pound bird while standing 10 paces from an unlocked door while equipped with a fully loaded bazooka, Kenneth, who died to the zombie from the tutorial, and Enrico, who was apparently some kind of grimy Mexican. When Rebecca isn't busy struggling to read her lines or having her head ripped off by hunters, she does her best to turn Chris's campaign into a dating sim between a man who would later be rewritten as a nutsack aficionado and a retard whose eggs are dropping like Michael J. Fox at Easter. Which is good, because unlike certain other Resident Evil games, this version of Chris doesn't go limp when in the red, if you know what I mean.
I'm talking about that clammy pussy that's probably full of Legos and SpaghettiO.
While I can get why people assume Chris is gay in later games, in this initial Resident Evil, he is obviously not. To get the best ending, Chris saves the only 2 people in the mansion who have gashes that bleed, and leaves Barry to rot. Even Wesker, the asexual king of the beta males, blasts a load on a teenage girl's tits, though this later backfires and he is hoisted by his own retard. Mechanically speaking, Resident Evil is less dated than you'd think. While sequels to and re-releases of Resident Evil include the ability to quick turn, strafe, auto-aim, and move while shooting, this initial game forced players to plan their movements carefully. Though Resident Evil had the least amount of monsters per area in the series, it also has the least amount of room to navigate around those abominations, forcing the player into tense confrontations. Atmospheric music, sound effects, and dramatic camera angles build the tension, though the fixed camera will occasionally feed you directly to your enemies, like some kind of digitized version of the German government. The tank controls work fine, save for when you want to turn while running. Then Chris and Jill move like Barry shambling to the toilet after eating an entire box of Hot Pockets, so you'll need to pull out a compass and plan that shit out in advance. Limited saves and non-regenerating health make optimizing your routes essential, and few players will finish the game without memorizing the locations of every magical chest. And no, I'm not talking about the one in Jill's shirt. In terms of the story, I would like to take this opportunity to point out the unending stupidity of Umbrella, the company behind the events of Resident Evil. Their top researchers locked their computers with 3-letter passwords named after their girlfriends, and their greatest weapon could be killed by anyone with the foresight to poke its gigantic exposed heart with a stick. Generally speaking, the less games in this franchise attempted to include or explain the actions of Umbrella, the better they turned out as a result. Resident Evil was, and continues to be at its best, when it focuses on a single set of characters in their particular circumstances, rather than an overarching story or connecting the various games. While Resident Evil 1 was an incredibly important moment in gaming history, the spin-offs and sequels that followed are a mixed bag of fun action and survival horror games, as well as some inexcusable turds.